Good morning and welcome to day 2 of this day in Holy Week history. Today is Monday, so we're going to look at what happened on Monday of Holy Week. I'll just jump right in and we'll read Mark chapter 11, verses 12 through 19. You can find this account in Matthew and Luke as well. We're going to concentrate on what Mark has to share this morning, although they are very similar stories. So if you would read with me Mark chapter 11, verse 12. The next day, when they went out of Bethany, he was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree with leaves, he went to find out if there was anything on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. And he said to it, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard it. And they came to Jerusalem, and he went into the temple and began to throw out those buying and selling. He overturned the tables of the money changers and the chairs of those selling doves, and would not permit anyone to carry goods to the temple. He was teaching them, "Is it not written, my house should be called a house of prayer for all nations? But you've made it a den of thieves." The chief priests and scribes heard it, started looking for a way to kill him, for they were afraid of him, because the crowd was astonished by his teaching. Whenever evening came, they would go out of the city. So what we need to see here is the disciples and Jesus are staying in Bethany. They're going to make their way to Jerusalem and then make their way back to Bethany at the end of Monday. But on the way, or while that day is going on, and we only really have two events that happen that day, both of those are key. And I think there's something to learn from both of those. The first episode deals with a fig tree. As they're making their way, Jesus is hungry. He sees a fig tree this fig tree has leaves to make it look like it's bearing fruit. It makes it look like it's healthy. If you walk up to it, there should be fruit there because of the leaves. Now, I don't know a lot about a fig tree. There happens to be a fig tree behind me that's in our yard. I was not even aware, not even certain this was a fig tree until a few days ago. So I'm not a fig tree expert, but evidently when a fig tree produces leaves, there should be some fruit or certain types of leaves there should be fruit on that tree. Jesus walks up to this fig tree. There is no fruit. He sees how beautiful the leaves are, and he sees how it should be bearing fruit because of the leaves, but it's not the right season. But still, Jesus is upset there's no fruit there, and he curses this fig tree. Now, just to give you a little bit of information on what's going to happen tomorrow, because Tuesday's a fairly big day, and we won't have time to cover everything. Tomorrow, they're going to walk back by this fig tree, and Jesus has cursed it on Monday, and by Tuesday, it's going to be withered up from the roots. And so he's going to really put a curse on this fig tree. Now, that's really odd for us to think. How could Jesus, the guy who loves everybody, Jesus who's come to save the world, why would he be so angry about not finding fruit on a fig tree that he would curse it? But there's a reason for that we're going to see in just a moment, I hope. Well, after the episode with the fig tree, him cursing the fig tree, and then they leave and go to Jerusalem, and they enter the temple in a very familiar story where we find Jesus overturning the tables and running out those buying and selling goods and the money changers in the temple. And he makes this comment, or he makes this statement that I think most of us have heard at some point, that this is supposed to be a house of prayer for all nations, and you've turned it into a den of thieves. And so he's angry. And so 2 times that day, Jesus is driven to anger. One time he's driven to anger about the lack of fruit on a fig tree, and another time because of what's going on in the temple, because they've made the temple a place to exchange money and sell goods and services. And so, but those two things may seem very odd, but they're actually very much linked. In the Old Testament, Israel was often called the vineyard of God, or God's vine. And so what we find is over and over again in Scripture, we find that the evidence of being the people of God is bearing fruit, is bearing the fruit of God. And so we do things, if we're the people of God, we do things that we bear fruit that mirrors how God would have us live and serve. And so when Jesus walks up to this fig tree, and it has this appearance of being healthy and ready to bear fruit, but then having no fruit, that is directly linked to Israel and the Jewish people at the time. And throughout history, they had this appearance. And there's no better example than what's happening during Holy Week. They're gathering during Holy Week to celebrate Passover, a special time. but really by this time it had become a big show. They were exchanging money in the temple and selling things and sacrifices in the temple to prepare. They were putting on a big ordeal. People gathered there as they did every year to celebrate, but it was more about celebration, more about production, more about the show, more about self-righteousness, more about justifying oneself and making people feel good than it really was about worshiping the Lord or bearing any fruit. And so that tree is directly linked to that as well. We see Jesus cursing that tree not because it did not have fruit, only because it did not have fruit, but because it had the appearance that it should have fruit. It was all about the show. From a distance, that tree looked as if it should bear fruit, but closer inspection showed no fruit, exactly like the nation of Israel at that time, especially the Pharisees. They made themselves look really good. They made themselves look like they were keeping the law. But when you scratched below the surface just a little bit, there was no fruit to be found. They put on a show that they had these beautiful leaves, but when you would examine them further, you would find no fruit. What fruit's in your life? How are you bearing fruit for the Lord? How are you bearing the Lord's fruit? And remember, we don't bear fruit so that the Lord will see us and accept us and love us. That's the opposite direction. We bear fruit because God already sees us and loves us and makes a way that we can be reconciled to Him. And so if we are truly the people of God, then we should be bearing God's fruit. We should be bearing fruit and be unlike that fig tree. And so the point here that I hope we can take away is just a deep reflection on what fruit am I bearing right now? Am I that fig tree that looks great and has leaves and looks like I'm that I should be bearing much fruit, but closer inspection shows no fruit? Or am I bearing fruit? And I pray that we're bearing fruit. The temptation is, especially in the gathered church sometimes, to put on a show, to see who can make this the best production, to do things to try to draw in a crowd because we are we do things that would pull people in because we put on a great production or a great show. But really, what draws people and what is the evidence that we belong to God is the fruit that we're producing. So may we not be like that fig tree, but be like the tree that Jesus talks about in Matthew chapter 7, the healthy tree that produces good fruit. And may that fruit multiply and multiply. And through that, may the Lord work and draw people to Himself. Thank you. I look forward to covering tomorrow with you, Tuesday of Holy Week.